Question number 36 on the writing and language portion of College Board's Test 5. So we said it's not difficult to understand why a cash-strapped, understaffed publication might feel pressure to cut teams of investigative reporters. Their work is expensive and time-consuming. Taking on the public interest. Oh man, this is a hard idiom question. If you want to say, it's just like this is just how you say it. You have to also know what the definition of each one of these idioms is. Taking on the public interest, investigative journalism. So this is what you guys did. This is a very hard question. I bet fewer than, I don't know, 5% of people get this question right. Honestly. You say taking on the public interest. And you're like, okay, and you're undertaking it, and you're like, oh, that sounds weird. And you're like overtaking the public interest, like a car overtakes another car. It's a very physical, that's not gonna be it. And taking off from, a plane takes off from an airport. That's the wrong idiom as well. So at least, I bet most people actually got it down between A and B. And your logic was, B sounds weird, I don't understand what that means, the answer therefore is gonna be A. Without even realizing what A means. Realize that taking on the public interest, what does it mean when you take on something? So I guess there's two definitions that come to mind. One of them is like you take on responsibility, right? So, oh, you know, he's taking on more responsibility now that he's an adult. It means that you're shouldering a burden or something, right? You're holding on, in which case then you might think, oh, that's reasonable in this case. Taking on the public interest, you're taking on the public interest. It's like you're putting it on your back. I can't fault you for that. But the other definition, and neither one of these arguably is better than the other. Like it's one of those things like if I accept the one that almost makes A seem right, then I also have to accept the one that makes it seem wrong. And the one that makes it seem wrong, what happens when you take on someone? I'm taking on corruption, right? I'm taking on bullying. I'm gonna taking on the public. What does it mean when someone takes on the world? Doesn't it mean that they're against them? When you take on the public interest, taking on, that really means that you're going against the public interest. Both of those definitions are correct. I can't say that one is better than the other in this case. I can't pick and choose my definition and be like, well, taking on, I'm talking about like you take on responsibility, it's like a good thing, you're shouldering it, you're like you're holding the public up, you're Atlas. And I might say, okay, maybe that's one way, but we have to always be careful about the way that we warp our logic in order to make an answer right, because we want it to be right, not because it actually is right. Taking on the public interest though, how could you possibly not take that to mean that you are going against the public? If you say I'm taking on corruption, I'm taking on the public, it doesn't mean that you're physically shouldering them or their burden. That doesn't really mean anything here. When you take on the public interest, it means you're going against it. That's irrefutable. And that bothers me because I always think if there's an answer choice that you can, if you can snake your way into logically believing that an answer choice is the right answer because you, again, warped your logic to make it so, always be conscientious of that. Realize when that happens, when you make stuff up in order to serve an end goal that you already concluded. So in other words, you're saying, I want A to be the answer. How can I make it the answer? Well, I guess there's some definition in some universe where you could make it make sense. Anytime you do that, chances are it's going to be wrong. Actually, almost always it's going to be wrong. I'm not saying that it's wrong because taking on does not mean, or you can't say you can't take on an interest or whatever. It means that you shoulder it, you burden it. However, it bothers me that the other meaning or definition of this idiom is exactly the opposite of that. Let's table that for now. Now let's take a look at B. What does it mean when I say undertaken in the public interest? It means exactly what it says. Investigative journalism is undertaken or done in the public interest. Undertaken in the public interest is grammatically correct. You might think it sounds weird or you've never heard it before, but it's an idiom that's widely used. Undertaken in the public interest means only one thing, and it means that investigative journalism is done with the public interest in mind. Only one definition for B. It's the only one that's unambiguous. That's the way that I at least treat this problem. A, ambiguous. I would actually, again, I'm being more generous, I think, to the people who picked A than not, because maybe someone would just say, like, well, like, that's not what it means. No, it does. It does. Taking on means that you can, it could be a positive thing. However, you can't avoid the fact that taking on the public interest means that you're going against the public. That's another usage of it. I don't like ambiguity in questions. There's no maybe answers on this test. It's either wrong in this case, or it's more correct. And in this case, B is more correct because it's never ambiguous. The answer to 36 is going to be B, maybe the hardest grammar question on this test.